Have you ever witnessed a moment of pure, unadulterated cruelty? A moment where one person puffed up with wealth and status tries to extinguish the dignity of another for sport. In the glittering heart of New York City, at a restaurant where a single plate costs more than a week's rent, a young waitress named Eleanor was about to have her spirit crushed. The woman belittling her was Tiffany Sterling, the flawless girlfriend of tech millionaire Julian Croft. In front of his most important clients, Tiffany unleashed a storm of venom that left the room in a shattered silence. But what she didn't know, what no one could possibly imagine, is that the woman she was trying to break was about to become the one person who could unravel her entire world. Because futures are not decided by the loudness of your insults, but by the quiet power you never see coming. The Gilded Sparrow wasn't just a restaurant. It was a theater, perched on the 60th floor of a skyscraper overlooking Central Park. Its floor-to-ceiling windows presented a panorama of 1,000,000 glittering ambitions. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of truffle oil, expensive perfume, and the low, confident hum of power. Conversations were transactions, smiles were negotiations, and every clink of Christoffel silverware against Bernardaud china was a punctuation mark in the story of New York's elite. And in this theater, Elena Petrov was one of the silent stagehands. At 26, Elena possessed a quiet grace that often made her invisible, a useful trait in her line of work. Her uniform, a crisp black dress shirt, tailored trousers, and a starched white apron, was a costume of servitude she wore with professional detachment. She moved between tables with an economy of motion that spoke of months of practice, her mind a complex Rolodex of wine pairings, dietary restrictions, and the subtle cues of a guest's mood. Tonight, the stakes were higher than usual. The corner table, the one with the most breathtaking view of the park, was reserved for Julian Croft. Even among the pantheon of tech gods, Croft was a rising deity. His company Innovate Dynamics was on the verge of launching Project Chimera, a revolutionary AI integration platform that promised to reshape data security. The dinner tonight was with investors from a Tokyo-based conglomerate, the final handshake before a 9-figure deal was inked. Elena felt the tension radiate from the maitre d', a perpetually stressed man named Jean-Pierre, who had briefed the staff 3 times. "Mr. Croft must not be disturbed," he'd hissed. "His companion, Miss Sterling, can be particular. Anticipate her needs. Perfection is the only acceptable standard." Eleanor knew of Tiffany Sterling. Who didn't? Her life was a meticulously curated Instagram feed of private jets, haute couture, and impossibly beautiful locations, always with Julian Croft by her side. She was the envy of thousands, a modern-day princess in a digital kingdom. When they arrived, the ambient hum of the restaurant dipped. Julian Croft was handsome in a way that seemed engineered in a lab, sharp jaw, intense blue eyes, and a suit so perfectly tailored it looked like a second skin. He exuded an aura of calm, focused power. Tiffany, by contrast, was a supernova. She wore a shimmering, backless dress of liquid gold diamonds dripping from her ears and wrist. Her smile was blindingly white, but it never quite reached her eyes. Her gaze swept the room with the dismissive air of a queen surveying a territory she already owned. Elena was assigned their section. "Good evening, Mr. Croft, Miss Sterling," she said, her voice calm and even. "May I start you with some water? We have still sparkling, or our artesian selection from Voss." Julian gave a curt nod. "Sparkling for the table." Tiffany, however, didn't look at Elena. She was busy adjusting the drape of her dress, her eyes scanning the other tables. "And bring a bottle of the 09 Petrus," she said, not as a request, but as a command. "Don't jostle it." Elena nodded, maintaining her professional composure. "An excellent choice, madame." The wine cost over $6,000 a bottle. It was more than she made in 2 months. The dinner began a ballet of service and diplomacy. Elena moved like a ghost, filling glasses before they were empty, clearing plates with silent efficiency. The Japanese investors were reserved and polite, speaking in low tones with Julian, who was in his element, charming, brilliant, and utterly convincing. The only discordant note was Tiffany. She seemed bored by the business talk, interrupting the flow to show off a new diamond bracelet or to complain about the temperature of the room. She treated Elena not as a person, but as a function and extension of the table. A snap of her fingers for more bread, a dismissive wave to clear a plate. Elena absorbed it all with practiced patience. It was part of the job. You built a wall inside your mind, and the condescension bounced right off it. But Tiffany seemed determined to find a crack in that wall. As Elena was carefully decanting the expensive red wine, a task requiring immense concentration, Tiffany shifted in her seat. "You know," Tiffany said loudly, her voice cutting through the men's conversation, "I was just telling Julian it's so sad what's happened to the service industry. It used to be a profession. Now it's just anyone, really." The Japanese investors looked up, a flicker of confusion in their eyes. Julian shot Tiffany a warning glance, a micro-expression of annoyance. Elena didn't react, her hand steady, as she continued to pour. She had to focus. One slip and thousands of dollars of wine would be on the floor, and her job along with it. Tiffany smirked, enjoying the attention. "I mean, look at her. What's your name again?" she asked finally, deigning to look at Elena, though her gaze was aimed somewhere around her chest. "Elena, madam," she replied, her voice level. "Elena," Tiffany repeated, drawing the name out as if it tasted foul. "And what's your story?" "Elena failed actress, art school dropout. What broken dream landed you here, refilling our water?" The air grew thick with unspoken embarrassment. The lead investor, Mr. Tanaka, cleared his throat and placed his chopsticks down, a sign of discomfort. Julian's jaw tightened. This was not part of the plan. Elena placed the decanter on the service table beside them. She straightened up, met Tiffany's mocking gaze for a brief second, and gave a small professional smile. "I'm here to ensure you and your guests have a flawless dining experience, madame," she said. "Is there anything else I can get for you at this moment?" Her poise, her refusal to be baited, seemed to infuriate Tiffany more than any emotional outburst could have. It was a denial of her power. For Tiffany Sterling, being ignored was the ultimate insult. And as Elena turned to retrieve the wine bottle, Tiffany's foot shot out just slightly. It was a small, almost imperceptible movement, but it was enough. The world seemed to slow down. Elena's foot caught the leg of Tiffany's chair. For a horrifying, drawn-out second, she fought for balance, her arms windmilling. But the laws of physics are indifferent to social status or 9-figure business deals. The bottle of 2009 Petrus, clutched in her hand, tipped. A river of dark, ruby-red wine cascaded downwards. It wasn't a splash. It was a deluge. It sheeted across the pristine white tablecloth, but its primary target was Tiffany Sterling's shimmering gold dress. A collective gasp went through the restaurant. The low hum of conversation ceased. Every eye in the Gilded Sparrow turned to their table. The wine, dark as blood, soaked into the delicate fabric of the dress, staining the brilliant gold with an ugly spreading blotch of deep purple. For a moment, there was only a stunned silence, the dripping of wine onto the polished floor, the only sound. Tiffany looked down at her ruined dress, her face a mask of perfect makeup contorted. First came shock, then disbelief, and then a wave of pure incandescent fury. Her shriek was sharp and piercing, a sound utterly alien to the restaurant's sophisticated ambiance. "You clumsy, incompetent bitch!" she screamed, leaping to her feet. The chair scraped back violently. "Look what you did! This is a vintage Galia Lahav. It's worth more than your entire pathetic life." Elena stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her mind was a whirlwind of panic. I'm so sorry, Miss Sterling. I tripped. I am terribly sorry." "Sorry?" Tiffany's laugh was brittle and cruel. "Sorry doesn't fix a $20,000 dress. You did this on purpose, I saw you. You were jealous." The accusation was so absurd it left Elena speechless. Julian was on his feet now, his face a thundercloud. He was looking at the ruined dinner, the horrified faces of his investors, the spectacle Tiffany was creating. His multi-million-dollar deal was dissolving in a puddle of spilled wine. "Tiffany, calm down," he said through gritted teeth. "Calm down." She wheeled on him. "She ruins my dress, humiliates me in front of your business partners, and you tell me to calm down. Are you going to defend this nothing?" Jean-Pierre, the maitre d', rushed over his face, pale. "Miss Sterling, please. We will handle everything. The cleaning is on the house, of course." Tiffany scoffed. "The house, this imbecile needs to pay for it. I want her fired. I want her fired, and I want her to pay for my dress." She jabbed a finger tipped with a blood-red nail at Elena. "You hear me? You are going to pay for this." Elena felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, judging, pitying, scorning. Her professionalism, the wall she had so carefully built, was crumbling. She could feel tears pricking at the back of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give this woman the satisfaction. "It was an accident," Elena said, her voice shaking but firm. "An accident you'll be paying for the rest of your life." Tiffany sneered. Julian finally stepped in, grabbing Tiffany's arm. His voice was dangerously low. "That is enough, Tiffany. You are making a scene." "I'm making a scene," she cried, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "She assaulted me with a bottle of wine, Mr." Tanaka and his associates were now standing, their faces impassive masks that barely concealed their profound discomfort. Mr. Tanaka gave a slight bow to Julian. "Croft-san," he said, his English precise. "Perhaps this is not the best time. We will be in touch." And with that, they turned and walked away. The deal was dead. Julian's face went white with fury. All his work, months of planning and negotiation, destroyed in a tantrum over a dress. He turned his glare on Eleanor, his eyes cold as ice chips. He saw not a person, but the catalyst of his failure. "Get her out of my sight," he seethed to Jean-Pierre. "She's fired, and yes, she will pay for the dress. My legal team will be in touch." He didn't even look at Elena as he said it, as if she were already a piece of trash that had been swept away. Jean-Pierre nodded meekly, avoiding Elena's gaze. He gestured for her to follow him. As Elena walked away from the table, a pariah in her own workplace, she could hear Tiffany's triumphant, cutting words follow her across the silent restaurant. "Let that be a lesson to you, sweetie," Tiffany called out, her voice dripping with venom. "Some people are born to pour the wine, and some are born to drink it. Don't ever forget your place again." Humiliation washed over Elena in a hot, sickening wave. She kept her head high as she walked toward the staff exit, but inside she had shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. In the gilded cage of New York's elite, she had just been taught her place. Little did any of them know her place was about to change dramatically. The walk home was a blur of streetlights and shame. The cacophony of New York City, the sirens, the traffic, the shouting was a dull roar compared to the looping monologue of failure in Elena's mind. Fired, sued for $20,000, humiliated. Each word was a fresh stab of pain. She lived in a tiny fourth-floor walk-up in Queens, a world away from the Gilded Sparrow. The rent was a constant source of anxiety, and the idea of a $20,000 debt was so astronomical it felt like a death sentence. She unlocked the door to her small apartment, a space that was neat and sparse, furnished with second-hand finds and a few cherished books. It was her sanctuary, but tonight it felt like a prison. She sank onto her worn-out sofa, the composure she had maintained so fiercely finally cracking. The tears came hot and silent. They were tears of anger as much as sadness. Anger at Tiffany's cruelty, at Julian's cold dismissal, and at a world that allowed such casual injustice. She had been working 2 jobs, the restaurant at night, a coffee shop in the morning, to save money. Not for a new wardrobe or a vacation, but to finish her degree in economics, a dream she'd had to put on hold when her mother got sick. The inheritance from her grandfather, the one she barely knew, was still tied up in probate. Her mother had always described him as a difficult, reclusive man who had cut ties with the family years ago. When he passed away a few months back, Eleanor was shocked to learn he had left her everything. His lawyer, a Mr. Abernathy, had been cryptic, telling her the estate was complex and would take time to settle. She assumed it was a small house in the suburbs, maybe a few thousand in savings. Enough to ease her burdens, but nothing life-altering. Now even that small hope felt distant. The lawsuit would wipe out whatever she was meant to receive. Sleep offered no escape, her dreams filled with the mocking laughter of Tiffany Sterling. She woke the next morning, feeling hollowed out, the grey dawn seeping through her window, matching her mood. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mr. Abernathy's office. "Good morning, Ms. Petrov. Mr. Abernathy requests your presence at our office at 10 a.m. today. It is a matter of utmost urgency regarding the final settlement of your grandfather's estate. Please confirm." With a sigh of resignation, she agreed. Might as well get all the bad news over with at once. The offices of Abernathy, Finch and Dalton were the antithesis of her tiny apartment. Located in a historic building on Park Avenue, the lobby was a cathedral of marble and polished brass. Elena, dressed in her best and only blazer, and a simple pair of black slacks, felt painfully out of place. Mr. Abernathy was a man who seemed to belong to a different era. He was in his late 60s, with a shock of white hair, kind eyes behind gold-rimmed spectacles, and a 3-piece suit that looked older than she was, but was impeccably maintained. He greeted her with a warm, paternal smile. "Eleanor, my dear, thank you for coming on such short notice," he said, guiding her into a vast, book-lined office with a view of the city that rivaled the one from the Gilded Sparrow. "Of course, Mr. Abernathy," she said, her voice small. "I assume this is about the probate being finalized." She steeled herself. "I need to be upfront with you. I was let go from my job last night. There's a potential legal issue. A woman is threatening to sue me for a large sum of money." Mr. Abernathy paused his hand on a stack of documents on his mahogany desk. He looked at her over his glasses, his expression one of gentle concern. "I am sorry to hear that. However, I believe that after our meeting today, a frivolous lawsuit for $20,000 will be the very least of your concerns." He gestured for her to sit in a plush leather armchair. He sat opposite her, folding his hands on the desk. "Elena," he began, his tone shifting from pleasant to serious, "I have not been entirely forthcoming about the nature of your grandfather's estate. Mikhail Petrov was a very, very private man. He valued anonymity above all else. He made me swear an oath to maintain that privacy until every I was dotted and every T was crossed. As of 8 a.m. this morning, that process is complete." He slid a thick, leather-bound portfolio across the desk towards her. "Your grandfather was not a simple man, nor did he lead a simple life despite appearances. He was a genius, a prodigy in software architecture and theoretical computing." Eleanor blinked. "My mother told me he was an engineer for a small electronics company." Abernathy chuckled softly. "That was his cover story. In the late 1990s, your grandfather Mikhail Petrov co-founded a technology startup with a partner, Robert Croft." The name hit Eleanor like a physical blow. "Croft. Robert Croft." Abernathy continued, watching her reaction. "Is the father of Julian Croft. The company they founded was called Innovate Dynamics." Elena's mouth went dry. She couldn't speak. It didn't make sense. Mikhail was the architect, the visionary. Robert was the businessman, the face of the company. They were brilliant together. But they had a falling out. A bitter one. Robert wanted to prioritize aggressive growth and commercialization, even if it meant compromising the core principles of user privacy and data ethics that Mikhail held sacred. Robert eventually forced Mikhail out of the company, but not before Mikhail secured his stake. He never sold a single share. He simply vanished from the corporate world, lived a modest life, and watched. Mr. Abernathy tapped the portfolio. He watched as Robert Croft grew the company into an empire and then passed it on to his son Julian. And all the while your grandfather's shares sat in a blind trust, quietly accumulating, splitting, and growing in value and power. He leaned forward, his eyes locking with hers. "Eleanor, your grandfather did not leave you a house. He did not leave you a savings account. He left you his entire undiluted stake in Innovate Dynamics. As of this morning, you are the beneficial owner of 42% of the company's shares. You are by a significant margin the single largest shareholder." The room tilted. The sounds of Park Avenue outside faded into a dull roar. Elena stared at the portfolio, her mind unable to process the words. Shareholder, 42%, Innovate Dynamics, Julian Croft. "But that's impossible," she stammered. I served him dinner last night. "I am aware of the unfortunate incident at the Gilded Sparrow." Mr. Abernathy said, his expression darkening slightly. "I have my sources. It seems the Croft family has a history of underestimating the Petrovs." He opened the portfolio. Inside were stock certificates, legal deeds, and a single sealed envelope addressed to her in a spidery script. "There is more," the lawyer said. "The company is holding an emergency board meeting tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Julian Croft is seeking final approval to launch Project Chimera. To do so, he requires the board to authorize a massive capital expenditure which will dilute the value of existing shares to fund the rollout. As the majority shareholder, your vote is not just important, it is decisive. Without your approval, Project Chimera does not happen." Elena's head was spinning. Last night she had been a waitress fired and threatened by Julian Croft and his girlfriend. Now she held the fate of his billion-dollar project in her hands. Mr. Abernathy gave her a steadying look. Your grandfather didn't just leave you his wealth, Elena. He left you a responsibility, and I believe an opportunity. The question is, what are you going to do with it? The next 24 hours were a crucible. Elena felt like she'd been shoved into a cockpit of a supersonic jet without a flight manual. Her small Queen's apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a holding cell before a great and terrifying trial. The leather portfolio sat on her coffee table like an alien artifact, pulsating with a power she didn't know how to wield. Panic was her first instinct. She could sell the shares. Take the money, an amount so vast she couldn't even comprehend it, and disappear. She could go back to school, take care of her mother, and live a life of quiet comfort, far from the world of Julian Croft and Tiffany Sterling. But then she thought of her grandfather, the ghost she'd never known. Why would he do this? Why not just leave her the money? Leaving her the shares. The controlling interest was a statement. It was a mission. And then she thought of Tiffany's sneering voice. Don't ever forget your place again. A new feeling began to displace the panic, a cold, hard resolve. They had judged her based on her uniform. They had dismissed her as a nothing. They were about to find out how wrong they were. She called Mr. Abernathy. I'm not selling, she said, her voice clear and stronger than she expected. I'm going to that meeting, but I need your help. I know nothing about Innovate Dynamics, about their board, about this project. A warm smile was evident in the lawyer's voice. I was hoping you'd say that, my dear. I have already taken the liberty of assembling a team. Consider me your consigliere. The car will pick you up in 1 hour. The car was a black, discreetly luxurious sedan that transported her not to a law office, but to a suite at the Carlisle Hotel, booked under a pseudonym. Waiting for her was not just Mr. Abernathy, but a team of 2 others. He introduced a sharp, no-nonsense financial analyst named Evelyn Reed, and a former tech journalist turned corporate strategist named Ben Carter. For the next 18 hours, the hotel suite became a war room. Evelyn Reed, with her spreadsheets and market analyses, broke down the company's financial health. She showed Elena the astronomical spending on Project Chimera, the risks, the potential rewards, and the corners Julian Croft was cutting to meet his ambitious launch date. He's leveraging the company's future on this, Evelyn explained, pointing to a terrifyingly steep projection chart. If it fails, Innovate Dynamics could be crippled. Ben Carter handled the human element. He provided detailed dossiers on every board member, Arthur Vance, an old-timer who had been loyal to her grandfather, but was now largely sidelined. Cynthia Blackwood, a shrewd venture capitalist and a staunch ally of Julian's, and 4 others, each with their own allegiances and vulnerabilities. Julian runs that boardroom like his personal fiefdom, Ben said, pacing the room. He's charismatic, he's his father's son, and he's delivered results. They're afraid to challenge him. You will be walking into a den of lions who think you're a lamb. But it was Mr. Abernathy who guided her on the most important subject, her grandfather, Mikhail Petrov. He painted a picture of a man who believed technology should serve humanity, not exploit it. He shared excerpts from Mikhail's old journals. Project Chimera, as Julian envisions it, Abernathy said, his face grave, is everything Mikhail feared. It's a powerful tool for data aggregation, yes, but it has back doors, weaknesses in its ethical protocols. It could be used for mass surveillance, for manipulation. Julian, in his hunger for market dominance, is ignoring the monster he's creating. Your grandfather called this kind of thinking the selling of the soul. Elena absorbed it all, her mind a sponge. She read technical summaries until her eyes burned. She memorized the faces and histories of the board members. She studied the financial projections. She wasn't just learning about a company. She was inheriting a legacy, a fight her grandfather had been forced to abandon. The final piece of their preparation was her transformation. A stylist, a discreet woman named Corinne, was brought in. Not to make her look like Tiffany Sterling, but to make her look like herself amplified. Gone was the waitress's practical ponytail, replaced by a sleek professional chignon. The ill-fitting blazer was replaced by a beautifully tailored Armani suit in a deep charcoal grey. It wasn't a costume. It was armor. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. The uncertainty was still there, deep in her eyes, but it was overlaid with a new layer of strength and purpose. She was no longer Elena Petrov, the waitress. She was the Petrov shareholder. Before they left the next morning, Mr. Abernathy handed her the sealed envelope from the portfolio. "From Mikhail," he said. "He asked that you read it just before you enter the fray." In the silent cocoon of the sedan gliding through the morning traffic towards the Innovate Dynamics Tower, Elena opened it. The handwriting was faint, the words of a man looking back on his life. "My dearest Elena, if you are reading this, then I have failed in my duty to know you, but I hope I have succeeded in my duty to protect you. I have left you not a treasure, but a burden and a choice. The world of men like Robert Croft and his son is built on the belief that people are assets to be leveraged and data to be mined. They have forgotten that technology without humanity is a weapon. I was a coward. I walked away from the fight. I leave you my sword and my shield, these shares, in the hopes that you will have the courage I lacked. Do not let them sell the soul of what we built. The choice is yours. Be wise. Be brave. Your grandfather, Mikhail." Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not let them fall. She folded the letter and placed it in her jacket pocket. It felt warm against her heart. The burden was real, but so was the courage he had hoped to give her. The car pulled up to the gleaming steel and glass skyscraper that housed the Emma Julian Croft commanded. As Elena stepped out of the car, flanked by Mr. Abernathy, she took a deep breath. She was terrified. But beneath the terror, a fire had been lit. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for Mikhail. The boardroom of Innovate Dynamics was on the top floor, a sterile sanctuary of glass chrome and Italian leather. It was designed to intimidate with a panoramic view of the city that seemed to declare dominion over everything it surveyed. The centerpiece was a colossal black granite table so polished it reflected the nervous faces of the board members like a dark, unforgiving pool. Julian Croft stood at the head of the table, radiating an effortless confidence. He was in his element. He wore a crisp blue shirt, with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, an affectation meant to convey a hands-on approach. He was charming the board, schmoozing Cynthia Blackwood, and gently ribbing Arthur Vance, making them feel like part of an exclusive winning team. Seated in a chair slightly behind him like a queen holding court was Tiffany Sterling. Her presence was highly unusual, a breach of corporate protocol, but Julian had insisted. He'd spun it as an opportunity for the board to meet the future brand ambassador for their consumer-facing products. The real reason was that after her public meltdown, he needed to keep her close to manage her. She was dressed in a pristine white Chanel suit, a picture of angelic innocence that was a stark contrast to her behavior less than 48 hours prior. She sipped a latte, a smug smile playing on her lips, basking in the reflected glory of Julian's power. She scanned the powerful faces around the table, knowing her position as the future Mrs. Croft was all but assured. "All right, let's get started," Julian said, his voice resonating with authority. "As you all know, today is the final green light for Project Chimera. This isn't just a product launch, it's the dawn of a new era for Innovate Dynamics." He launched into his presentation, a dazzling display of ambitious projections and slick marketing videos. He was a master salesman, painting a picture of a future where Innovate Dynamics was not just a company, but an essential part of daily life. The board was captivated. At precisely 10:15 a.m., the heavy glass doors to the boardroom hissed open. Everyone turned. Julian paused mid-sentence, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face at the interruption. His assistant, a young man named David, stood in the doorway looking flustered. "Mr. Croft, I'm so sorry to interrupt," he stammered. "But you have visitors. They insist the meeting cannot proceed without them." "I'm not expecting anyone," Julian said, his voice sharp. "Tell them to make an appointment." "I tried, sir. They said—" David swallowed hard. "They said their appointment was made 25 years ago." Before Julian could respond, a figure stepped past the flustered assistant and into the boardroom. It was Mr. Abernathy, his old-world dignity, a stark contrast to the room's cold modernity. "Julian," Mr. Abernathy said, his voice calm, but carrying an undeniable weight. "I apologize for the intrusion." Julian's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Abernathy, my father's old lawyer. What is this about? If you're here about the Petrov estate, you can speak with our legal department. This is a closed board meeting." "On the contrary," Mr. Abernathy replied, a faint, cryptic smile on his lips. "My business today is exclusively with this board." He stepped to the side, revealing the person who had been standing behind him. Elena Petrov walked into the room. The silence that fell was absolute, heavy, and immediate. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. The board members stared their minds, struggling to reconcile the image of the poised, powerfully dressed woman before them with any context they could imagine. But two people recognized her instantly. Julian Croft's charismatic smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. His brain short-circuited. The waitress, the fired waitress from the restaurant, here, in his boardroom. It was impossible. A prank. A hallucination. Tiffany's reaction was more visceral. The smugness on her face curdled into a sneer of disbelief, which then morphed into contempt. "What the hell is she doing here?" She spat her voice, a harsh whisper that carried across the silent room. "Security. Get her out of here." Elena's eyes met Tiffany's for a fleeting moment. There was no fear in her gaze this time, only a calm, unnerving stillness. Then her eyes moved to Julian, who was still speechless, his face pale. Mr. Abernathy walked calmly to the table and placed his leather briefcase upon it. "There seems to be a misunderstanding," he said, addressing the entire board. "This is not a social call. Allow me to introduce you all to Elena Petrov." He opened his briefcase and produced a set of legally certified documents, placing a copy in front of each board member. "As of 8 a.m. yesterday morning," Mr. Abernathy announced, his voice ringing with legal finality, "the blind trust of Mikhail Petrov has been dissolved, and the entirety of his holdings has been transferred to his sole heir. Ms. Petrov is the beneficial owner of 1.2 billion shares of Innovate Dynamics. She controls 42% of this company." The sound of Tiffany Sterling choking on her latte was the only sound that broke the stunned silence. Arthur Vance, the elderly board member, fumbled with his glasses, his hands shaking as he read the document. A slow smile spread across his face. "Mikhail's girl," he whispered in awe. Cynthia Blackwood stared at Elena, her shrewd mind rapidly reassessing the entire power dynamic of the room. Julian looked as if he had been physically struck. 42%. It couldn't be. The ghost of his father's old partner, the man he'd only heard about in angry whispers, had come back to haunt him through the vessel of a waitress. The waitress he had fired. The waitress whose life his girlfriend had tried to ruin over a spilled drink. "This is insane," Tiffany finally managed to say, her voice shrill with panic. "She's a nobody. A waitress. This has to be some kind of joke." Elena finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, yet it commanded the attention of everyone in the room. "I was a waitress, Ms. Sterling," she said, her gaze unwavering as it settled on Tiffany. "Today I am your company's largest shareholder, and I'd thank you to remember your place." She used Tiffany's own words, twisting the knife with surgical precision. She then turned her attention to the head of the table. "Mr. Croft, I believe you were in the middle of a presentation. Please continue. I'm very interested to hear about the future you have planned for my company." The power in the room had not just shifted, it had undergone a tectonic upheaval. Julian Croft, who moments before had been the undisputed king in his castle, was now staring at a ghost who held his crown in her hands. He was a performer whose stage had just collapsed from beneath him. He floundered, trying to regain his composure. "This is an unexpected development," he managed, his voice strained. "But it changes nothing. We are here to vote on the funding for Project Chimera. The metrics speak for themselves. This is the future." He tried to project his usual confidence, but it was a hollow echo. He was no longer speaking to a compliant board. He was pleading his case to a single, silent woman. Elena walked slowly towards the table, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. Mr. Abernathy pulled out an empty chair for her not far from the head of the table. She sat placing her hands on the cool granite surface. She looked not at Julian, but at the board members, making eye contact with each of them one by one. "Before we proceed to a vote," Elena said, her voice measured and clear, "I have a few questions about this project." Julian's jaw tightened. "The technical specifications are in the brief you well, you haven't seen the brief, but I can assure you it's secure." "I'm not asking about the specifications, Mr. Croft. I'm asking about the ethics," Elena said. She pulled a slim folder from her own briefcase, the result of her 18-hour cram session. "I was reading through the public-facing prospectus last night. It uses a lot of wonderful words: synergy, integration, user-centric. But I also had my team analyze the proposed data architecture." She slid a single sheet of paper across the table to Arthur Vance. "Mr. Vance, you worked with my grandfather. Does Protocol 7, the core of this project's data mining algorithm, look familiar to you?" Arthur put on his glasses, his eyes scanning the page. A look of dawning horror crossed his face. "My God," he breathed. "This is Pandora, Mikhail's old theoretical project. He called it the most dangerous idea he ever had. He ordered it dismantled. He said it was ethically indefensible." A murmur went through the board. Cynthia Blackwood leaned forward. Her eyes narrowed. "What was Pandora?" "My grandfather designed it as a thought experiment." Elena explained, her voice resonating with an authority that came from her grandfather's own words. An AI that could not only collect user data, but predict and subtly influence user behavior by curating the information they see. He proved it was possible and then locked it away, believing it was too powerful and too easily abused for surveillance or commercial manipulation. He said it turned people from users into puppets. She finally turned her gaze to Julian. "Why is my grandfather's most dangerous idea at the heart of your flagship project, Mr. Croft?" Julian was cornered. "We've implemented safeguards. It's not the same thing. We've modernized it." "You've monetized it," Eleanor corrected him, her voice cutting like steel. "You took his nightmare and branded it as a dream. You're not just asking for funding. You're asking this board to approve the launch of a system designed for mass manipulation, all for the sake of quarterly earnings." Tiffany could no longer contain herself. Her dream of becoming the queen of this empire was being dismantled by the waitress she had tormented. "Who does she think she is?" she exclaimed, standing up. "Julian, are you going to let this waitress, who probably can't even balance her own checkbook, lecture you about your own company?" Julian shot her a look of pure fury. "Tiffany, be quiet." "No. This is ridiculous. She's getting back at us for what happened at the restaurant. This isn't business. It's a pathetic personal vendetta." Elena slowly turned her head to face Tiffany. A faint, pitying smile touched her lips. "Ms. Sterling, the incident at the restaurant was indeed personal. Your behavior was a masterclass in cruelty. It taught me a valuable lesson about the kind of people who confuse wealth with worth." She paused, letting the words hang in the air before delivering the final blow. "But you are mistaken. This is not a vendetta. You are simply not important enough for that. This," she said, turning back to the board, "is business. It's the business of ensuring Innovate Dynamics doesn't rot from the inside out by sacrificing its soul for profit. My grandfather founded this company on a principle of ethical innovation, under the leadership of your father, and now you, Mr. Croft. It seems that principle has been forgotten." Her words landed like hammer blows. Julian's carefully constructed image was shattered. He was no longer the visionary leader. He was the reckless son who had stolen the ideas of a better man. "I'm calling for a full, independent ethical and security review of Project Chimera," Eleanor announced. "All development is to be frozen effective immediately. The vote on funding is hereby tabled indefinitely." It was not a request. It was a decree. "You can't do that," Julian protested, his voice cracking. "With 42% of the voting shares, I can," Elena replied calmly. "And with Mr. Vance's support, which I believe I have, that makes it a majority." Arthur Vance looked at Elena, his eyes shining with unshed tears. He saw Mikhail's fire in her eyes. "You have my vote, Miss Petrov," he said firmly. "It's long past time someone remembered what this company was supposed to stand for." The battle was over. Julian Croft slumped into his chair, utterly defeated. His project was dead, his authority gone. He had been publicly castrated by the woman he had dismissed without a second thought. Tiffany Sterling stood frozen, her face a mask of horror. The room, the power, the money. It was all slipping through her fingers. She looked at Julian for support, but he wouldn't even meet her gaze. He was staring at Elena not with hatred anymore, but with a terrifying, dawning sense of awe and regret. In that moment, Tiffany understood. She wasn't just losing the argument. She was losing everything. The boardroom emptied out in a state of shell shock. The board members, except for Arthur Vance, who stayed behind to speak warmly with Elena, filed out with quiet, averted eyes. They knew the landscape had irrevocably changed. Power had a new name, and it was Petrov. Julian remained in his chair, a king deposed in his own throne room. Tiffany, realizing the show was over, and she was now an unwelcome spectator, tried one last desperate gambit. She rushed to Julian's side, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Julian, baby, you have to fight this," she pleaded, her voice a desperate whisper. "Call your lawyers. We can't let her do this to us." Julian slowly lifted his head. He looked at her hand on his shoulder, as if it were a spider. Then he looked at her face, and for the first time, he seemed to see past the perfect makeup and the expensive clothes. He saw the ugliness she had displayed at the restaurant, the screeching entitlement, the casual cruelty that had set this entire catastrophe in motion. She wasn't a partner. She was a liability. A beautiful, expensive, and ultimately toxic liability. "There is no us, Tiffany," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. He shrugged her hand off. "Your car is waiting downstairs. Have my assistant clear your things out of the penthouse. I want you gone by the time I get home." The color drained from Tiffany's face. "Julian, no, you can't. After everything." "Go," he said, his voice flat and final. He turned away from her, a symbolic gesture that was as brutal as any slap. Defeated and publicly discarded. Tiffany. Sterling stumbled out of the boardroom, her reign over. Her future, once as glittering as her diamond bracelet, was now as empty as her promises. Now only Eleanor, Mr. Abernathy, and Julian remained in the vast, silent room. Julian finally stood up and walked over to the window, staring down at the city he had thought he owned. He never sold his shares. He said more to himself than to Eleanor. "My father told me he scared Mikhail off, that he ran him out of the business. He never told me he was pushed." "My grandfather wasn't scared," Eleanor said quietly, walking to stand a few feet behind him. "He was heartbroken. He saw what the company was becoming, and he chose to walk away, rather than be a part of it." Julian turned to face her. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, humbled curiosity. "Why were you working at that restaurant with all this? Why?" "Because until 2 days ago I didn't know any of this existed," she said simply. "I was just a girl trying to pay her rent and finish her degree. The same girl you fired and threatened to sue for $20,000. Shame washed over Julian's face. It was a genuine, painful emotion. "I am sorry," he said the words, feeling inadequate. "For that, for Tiffany's behavior. It was inexcusable." "Yes, it was," Elena agreed, offering no easy absolution. A long silence stretched between them. Julian, the master of the deal, the king of the pitch, had no words. He had been outmaneuvered not by a corporate raider or a market rival, but by a woman armed with a quiet dignity and a forgotten legacy. "What now?" he finally asked. "Do you fire me, dismantle the company?" This was the moment of her triumph, the chance for ultimate revenge. She could banish him, just as he had banished her. But as she looked at him, she didn't feel vengeful. She just felt the immense weight of her grandfather's last wish. "Be wise. Be brave." "No," she said. "You're a brilliant, talented man, Mr. Croft. You've built an empire. But you've built it on a flawed foundation. I'm not here to tear it down. I'm here to fix the foundation." She extended a hand, not for a handshake, but as an open gesture. "You'll stay on as CEO for now, but you will report to me and to a new ethics oversight committee, which Mr. Vance and I will establish. Project Chimera will be rebuilt from the ground up with my grandfather's original principles of privacy and user protection as its core. We will be a different kind of company, the kind it was always meant to be. Julian stared at her, stunned by her proposition. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't revenge. It was a second chance, but a conditional one. It was a challenge. Slowly, hesitantly, he reached out and shook her hand. His felt cold. Hers was steady and warm. I understand, he said. As she and Mr. Abernathy left the building, Eleanor felt the exhaustion of the last 2 days finally settle upon her. But it was mixed with a profound sense of purpose. She had not only honored her grandfather's memory, but had given it a future. That evening, back in her small Queen's apartment, that suddenly felt more like home than ever, she reread Mikhail's letter. She realized he hadn't just left her a sword and a shield. He had left her a compass. The path forward would be difficult, navigating a world of corporate intrigue she was just beginning to understand. But for the first time in her life, Elena Petrov knew exactly who she was and what she was meant to do. She had found her place not in the gilded cage of a fancy restaurant, but at the head of a table where she could build a better world. Elena's story isn't just about a satisfying twist of fate. It's a powerful reminder that our true worth is never defined by our job title, our uniform, or the condescending words of those who look down on us. It is forged in our character, our resilience, and the quiet dignity with which we face injustice. Tiffany Sterling saw a waitress and tried to break her, but she was blind to the strength, intelligence, and legacy simmering just beneath the surface. This story shows us that karma might not always be instant, but integrity is its own form of power, and sometimes the most unassuming person in the room is the one who is about to change all the rules. If this story of justice and empowerment resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need a reminder of their own inner strength. And for more real-life stories of triumph drama and incredible twists, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. What did you think of Elena's final decision? Let us know in the comments below.